Welcome to PhillyCAM Voices. I'm your host, Shivani Reddy. I'm here with Beth McConnell from the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. Hi, Beth. It's great
Hey,
to have you
Shivani.
here with us today.
Hey, Shivani, it's great to be with you.
So I'd just like to begin by having you introduce yourself and, letting our viewers know what you do and what kinds of work you do in regards of affordable housing.
Sure. So I'm the policy director at the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations. We go by PACDC for short. And we're a membership association that works with nonprofit community development corporations and other organizations that care about building an equitable city and revitalizing our neighborhoods in an equitable way. And so that includes doing a lot of advocacy around affordable housing. And our members also build and preserve and repair affordable homes for people who are facing homelessness or other people who are lower income and need some help and assistance in finding affordable quality homes across the city.
That's amazing. So your organization, you guys recently came out with a press release about, the support for City Council proposing to use revenue from the construction impact tax. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of points. Has there been any recent assistance to help people pay, their rent and mortgages, especially to the offset loss of COVID?
There has. So the good news is that there's been tens of millions of dollars that have flown to Philadelphia renters and homeowners as a result of legislation passed in Congress back in the spring called the CARES Act. And so that money's been used to help renters and their landlords. Some of the money goes through the landlords to pay a portion of their rent for a couple of months. And some of it has also gone to homeowners that could be facing foreclosure to help them meet their mortgage payments so that they don't lose their homes as well. The bad news is if you haven't already applied, unfortunately, you're too late. All the application deadlines for these programs have passed. And unfortunately, the bad news also is there's not enough money for everybody that needs help and everybody that applies. So not everybody will get resources. But it has been very helpful and has made a big difference for some people, but we need to go further and Congress needs to do more.
And has there been any assistance for landlords, especially if their tenants aren't paying as a way to prevent the eviction?
Yeah, some of the programs require that the tenant and the landlord apply together, and the money actually goes to the landlord to pay the rent on behalf of the tenant. Some of the programs are able to give tenants some assistance directly. It really depends on where the money's coming from and how the programs were designed. But that was a key component of many of the rental programs is working directly with the landlords.
Mm-hmm.
Some landlords have also been offered, and I don't know how many have taken advantage of it, some low interest loans and other programs to help them get through the tough times. The city's office of the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, which is one of the city offices that does a big chunk of the housing work, has been trying to, make a bunch of options available for tenants and landlords to get through these tough times.
Okay. And, would you be willing to project into the future for us and kind of tell us what you think the repercussions would be down the road in regards to the way the pandemic has affected us and will continue to affect housing issues in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the bad news first and then end with what I think is the good news.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is that, as I said earlier, the rental assistance programs that have been out there aren't enough, right? We, as a city with, nearly 1.6 million people, with a poverty rate nearly 24%, facing the greatest economic crisis that we've seen in generations, the resources that have come here for rental assistance have not been able to serve all of the people that need it. Some people probably didn't even know about it. So while there have been moratoriums on eviction for much of the last couple months since COVID, those moratoriums are going to expire, most of them by the end of December. And so folks who have not been able to keep up on their rent and have not been able to get assistance are going to find huge bills coming due, and they don't have the resources to pay them. And their landlords are going to be taking them to court and evicting them. So without more resources, we could see an eviction crisis and a homelessness crisis unlike anything that we have seen in Philadelphia. So severe, but happening all at one time, right? In previous economic crises, it hasn't just been all of a sudden in 1 month, everybody becomes out of work and housing unstable. There's usually been a kind of a gradual, dangerous and terrible, but more of a gradual approach. With COVID, obviously things are very different. So that's really terrifying. The good news, though, and with that, is that Philadelphia created something called the Eviction Diversion Program. After talking about it for years and years and years, COVID was the thing that finally lit the fire to get it done. And that's a great program that anybody who's facing eviction that qualifies under the kind of income guidelines could seek assistance from an attorney, a legal services attorney, to negotiate and mediate with their landlord to see if they could come up with a solution to avoid eviction. So folks can pursue that program, and that's going to stay around post-COVID. So I think that's the bright side. The other bright side is I do think that Congress will probably pass another stimulus bill. We don't know when, and we don't know how big it will be, and we don't know what all the dollars will go for. But there's very strong support for sending additional dollars to housing to prevent the kind of homelessness and eviction and foreclosure crisis that we're facing, and that could be very devastating. So I'm confident that those resources will come, but I'm not confident that they'll come fast enough. Mm-hmm. And that's really something I think everybody listening and watching today, make sure you call your senators and your congressperson and tell them to push hard to get those housing resources available.
Of course. So in regards to the press release, what policy is in the works with City Council regarding the construction impact tax, which is being used to push towards like commercial corridors and affordable homes?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, how amazing and incredible it's been. All the activism in Philadelphia that's been directed towards City Council to push them to take housing more seriously has led to a lot of victories in the last few years, and has led to Council really acting and leading. Many different members of Council and the administration, Kennedy administrations, has also been responsive to addressing some of these issues. And that's led us to a proposal to do a $400 million bond. And the construction impact tax would basically be the tax that would pay the debt service on the bond. So, if you float a bond, you need to pay it back. So you need to have the money for that. And that's what they're proposing to do with this 1% construction impact tax. That $400 million bond, if the construction impact tax is passed and the $400 million bond is floated, that's money that could go to build new affordable homes. It's money that could go to repair existing affordable homes, whether it's an owner-occupied home that needs a new roof or plumbing in order to stay habitable, or it's rental housing that's affordable that really needs major improvement so that it's healthy and safe and stays affordable and doesn't get flipped into a market rate unit. Those are all resources that we could use those bond dollars for, and it would be just to compare, it would be a significant increase in funding for affordable homes at the local level here in Philadelphia compared to what we typically are able to spend in a given year. But it won't solve the problem. Even $400 million won't solve the problem. Mm-hmm. But it could lead to economic recovery and jobs while creating and preserving affordable homes that people need.
So just a quick question, in terms of the construction impact tax, it generates between $20 million and $26 million a year. I'm not familiar with this tax, but do you know how long this tax plan has been put in place for?
So if the legislation to create the construction impact tax passes, mm-hmm. Developers basically would pay this 1% of the tax mm-hmm. to the city's general fund, and that tax would exist forever or until City Council repeals it or rolls it back. But typically when you float a bond, say for $400 million, that takes about 20 years to pay down. So the idea would be to kind of dedicate, if you would, the revenue that's coming in from this construction impact tax, that $20 to $26 million a year, to pay off the bond over the next 20 years. So that way we get the cash up front, so we can spend $400 million now or over the next few years, creating those jobs and building that housing and providing people's housing needs. But it's a loan, so we have to pay it back, and that's what the construction impact tax would basically do, mm-hmm. probably for the next 20 years or longer.
And just kind of going back to the other question in terms of, can you give me like a concrete example of what the policy would kind of like do? Like, is it going to help develop community control? And especially because Philadelphia is going through a gentrification issue, is it going to push back on that's being pushed by developers?
It absolutely can. One of the things that money could also be used is for acquisition of land and property in any part of the city where it's available and we want to purchase it. So that means that the money could be used to buy, vacant lots or deteriorated buildings in neighborhoods that are gentrifying so that we can put affordable homes in those places. That's getting increasingly harder and harder to do. Because there's less and less land available in those places for affordable housing providers to purchase, and because it's expensive. And if you're an affordable housing provider, you basically need someone to give you the land for free if you're going to be able to do the expensive building construction and keep it affordable to people in the community. So by the city playing a role in using some of these dollars from the construction impact tax bond to purchase property across the city, we can set them aside for the affordable housing developers. Who will find funding from a variety of different sources, from the bond issue itself and from other places to actually build the affordable homes. I think one of the other things that you're getting at that's really important is the idea of community control of that land. And several CDCs across Philadelphia either have already created or are beginning to create something called a community land trust. And that's a way for there to be a bit more community control over the property permanently. And so again, that's something that these funds could be used to help create these community land trusts and get them the land and the property that they need to make that land trust function.
Okay. And then how are the costs of affordable housing being calculated right now?
So do you mean what means that the unit is affordable? What that means? So generally the rule is you should pay no more than 30% of your income on housing in order for it to be considered affordable to you. The more you pay of your income, the more we call you housing cost burdened, is that language. So, but that's a really different story if you make $1 million a year versus if you make $20,000 a year, right? 30% of your income, if you're making $1 million, will get you a pretty nice house and you'll be just fine. At 30, if you're a very low income person, you're making, say, $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, or even less than that. That's generally the kind of population that we're trying to target with affordable homes. People that are making, half or less of what's the area's median income is. So that's what most of these programs are going to target and where they should target and where we have the greatest need. Just to put this in context, in Philadelphia, recent research has estimated that there are 70,000 extremely low income households. So they're very, very low income. They are paying more than $528 more every month in rent than they can afford. So that's a big chunk of money that's not going to food or transportation or healthcare or education or clothing. And so if we can reduce that cost burden for those folks, we can keep them more safely and stably housed and allow them to use that income on other critical basic necessities.
And then in terms of long-term affordable housing solutions, what are some barriers that are, making this a reality? Where can people best invest in their advocacy efforts?
So I absolutely call your congresspeople and your senators and tell them to act immediately to do another COVID relief package that puts resources into housing. That's absolutely critical. Congress really needs to act. I mean, state and city governments are struggling right now because of COVID and because of the budget limitations. So Congress absolutely has to act. However, definitely call your city council person and tell them that you support, if you do, this construction impact tax, because there's a lot of opposition to it. Obviously, the developers that will pay the tax don't want to. There's no surprise there. You wouldn't want to pay it either if you had to, but we need them to. We need them to pitch in and chip in the service of ensuring that every Philadelphian has a decent, affordable, safe home, because the city will not do well if we have people that continue to struggle with homelessness, with housing instability. That's bad for it's not only bad for their lives, it's bad for the entire community. And so if you really care about Philadelphia and care about the success of our neighbors, everybody who has resources, including large developers that have been very profitable in the last few years, need to contribute something towards affordable homes. And I will say that actually some developers actually support this proposal. In fact, the Building Industry Association, the BIA, has actually issued a statement in support of this idea, saying they're willing to pay this extra tax. Now, they have asked, of course, in return for a delay in implementation of reform to the property tax abatement. And we think that temporarily that's a fair trade right now when we need those resources immediately. Because I think what we're getting in the long run are more resources for housing over a longer period of time in exchange for that short-term delay in implementation of the abatement. Not everybody agrees with that idea. There's good arguments to be made on all sides, but we think you reach out to your member of city council. They need to hear from you. There's no guarantee that this bill will pass at all. So they need to know what residents of Philadelphia and their constituents think about it.
Of course, COVID really did do a lot of damage, especially in terms of homelessness population within Philadelphia. Beth, is there anything else you wanted to maybe add on, if people have been experiencing homelessness prior to the pandemic or due to the pandemic, what is it they can do?
Yeah, that's such an important question. We had a housing affordability crisis before the pandemic. We had a growing homelessness population, largely exacerbated by the opioid epidemic before the pandemic. And so the pandemic obviously just makes everything harder because it creates a whole new universe of people who are struggling that weren't struggling before. And unfortunately, a lot of the assistance that has come from the federal government has been earmarked specifically for people who are struggling because of COVID. So there are some people who have struggled with homelessness for a long time that aren't getting access to some of those benefits. And that's a real struggle. So the first thing I would do is make sure that, again, when you're contacting your members of Congress or city council, to speak up for the people who were struggling already before and are hurt even more now, and making sure that they get access to those resources. The other thing that folks can do if they're facing homelessness is to make sure that you're in touch with the city's Office of Homeless Services. Unfortunately, they just, even before the pandemic and still today, don't have all the resources that they need to serve everyone that needs it. But they need to hear from you, even if they can't help you. We need to know that you're out there, so that us as advocates and others can be pounding down the doors for our elected officials, saying you're not serving the people who are needed, that the waiting lists are too long, the lines for assistance are too long, and we're not serving people. So I think it's important that you give them a call, and you can go to their website at philadelphiaofficeofhomelessservices.org to reach out. But I would also recommend that Save Your Home Philly hotline is a great place to go because they can send you in all the different directions, all the different agencies that could be available to help.
And is there anything else you would like our viewers to know?
Just a reminder, if you're facing eviction, you may qualify for the Eviction Diversion Program, and you can go to phlevictiondiversion.org to learn more.
Thank you, Beth, so much for being with us today and continuing to work towards affordable housing for people here in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you.
Of course.
For PhillyCAM Voices, I'm Shivani Reddy.